Okay, so at this point, let's demonstrate how to locate a treatise using the library catalog, Lexis Advance, and also Westlaw. For this particular problem, let's assume that we would like to learn about setback requirements for developing property. Setback requirements are generally found under zoning law, which itself is generally found under property law. So we have a couple different ways that we can approach the problem. Uh, First thing we want to consider is when we're searching the library catalog itself is what kind of records are contained within the library catalog. They're not full text records. They're going to be bibliographic information. So we'll have just a little bit of information about the records like a title and author, maybe a description or notes field. So when we think about formulating searches for the catalog, we want to think more broadly. For this problem, let's just look for treatises on zoning law. Now, the thing about treatises is often the word treatise is not actually in the title, so we wouldn't really want to use that as a search term. We could simply put down zoning law, and then we can use the default choice here, which is keyword. You could run a narrower search and use title, for example, or even subject. But for starters, we'll take a broader search and look at keyword. The other thing to note about the CU Law Libraries catalog, there's a second search engine here. This is a little bit broader in the sense it'll search through database articles and other materials. We're really looking for something narrower, a zoning law treatise, perhaps something in the library as well. So this first option, which is narrower, is a better choice initially. So we'll click on the search button. And here are the law pack or the library catalog search results. And at this point, really what we want to do is sort of scan the titles. We see the zoning law and practice title. Appears to be the most relevant of 313 search results. It is a publication from Lexis. The author is here. We find out the location. It says Law Stacks first floor, and it gives us a call number. There's also an electronic resource. We're not sure that's the right choice, but what we'll do is we'll scan through a few more results, and the thing we really want to do is look for those call numbers and see if there is a particular call number region in the library where these sorts of materials are located. Again, this goes back to that stand and scan method of finding treatises. If we generally find the call number area where the treatises are, we can walk to that area of the library if we're located in or near the law library to see what the titles look like and how they function. And we do see that this is 5690. We'll zoom in a little bit. 5698 for the zoning law and practice. There is KF 5698. KFN, not sure that's a New York title. It might be in the New York materials. KFC is a Colorado. Zoning law and practice again, 5698, 5698, 5698. Colorado we're not interested in. This would be in the Colorado collection. Here's something else, land use 5698. And we even see a title, land use law in a nutshell, also at 5698. We know a little bit what that's going to be like. That's going to be a general, broader overview. We'd like to find something a little bit more weighty than a nutshell. Here's even a handbook of 5698. Okay, so one thing we could do from this search is we could write down that call number KF5698Y6 and head to that part of the collection. Before we do that though, let's take a look at what kind of titles are in our catalog. Let's take a look at this first one, Zoning Law and Practice. Here is the display from the library catalog. And we pick up a few things. The title, of course, the author. We don't get much information here about the author, but that's okay for now. We see that where it's located, and it's a multi-volume set, so they're volumes 1 through 8. And it's a Lexis publication, and individuals with the Lexis advanced academic credentials can link through here to get to it. We'll do that in a second. Before we leave this display, though, we also like to look at the details. The subject falls under zoning law, United States. That's very useful. We'll look at that in a second as well. There's an alternate title. And we also see that it is there's a summary here. This 8-volume treatise covers all the law related to zoning. So that's useful. Sometimes you'll see a notes field. Sometimes the cataloger will include chapter content, title of contents, not the contents themselves, and other information. Well, this is great. So one way we could find it beyond walking to the point in the collection and finding it is click on this link for electronic version Lexis Online. And when we do that, we are going to be brought directly to the treatise on LexisNexis. So this is great. Here's zoning law and practice. We can find out now a little bit more about it by clicking on the information bubble. It tells us that this is the coverage is updated through November 2017, release number 18. It gives us a little bit about the subject and the author and so forth. So this is good. We can now review the table of contents because it defaults us to the listing a table of contents in the chapters. We also could look at the index. We could look at the publication information. Here's the question about the authors themselves. And this is good too. Nashville, Tennessee, former director of law review, etc. And finally, we can go and see the prefaces, and then we can run search terms. All right, so that was probably successful. We can enter our search terms and find out about setback requirements. Before we do that, though, let's look at another approach to searching the catalog. I pointed out that in our original search, there were 313 titles based on a keyword searching of zoning law, which is a substantial search. What we could do, though, if we wanted to narrow the results down, or at least find results that were directly about zoning law as a subject, is use this subject heading. So this is a little bit like doing the stand and scan method, but online, because now we are looking at those materials, and you see the gray box that does it for us, those materials dealing with zoning law United States as a subject entry. Now the subject entry is put in by the cataloger. It's also dictated by the material themselves. And there are 89 additional entries in addition to these. So let's click on that entry for zoning law United States, and we get 93 entries, as we expected, and every one of these has as a subject zoning law of the United States. So this is perhaps a more refined search in getting us directly what we want. And just browsing through the titles, we see some other titles. Here's American Land Planning Law, Land Use, and the Police Power. It's a Thomson Reuters West publication. American Law of Zoning, and you could go through the list to find other zoning law titles. That would be both broad and narrow, the single volume, multi-volumes. This is what the library has in its collection about zoning law. So there is a title here that I think might be worth looking at, and it's this American Law of Zoning. It's a Thomson Reuters West publication. We could access it the same way that we access the Lexis publication using this link, but instead let's do this. Since we have the title, let's go and look at how to find that title if we were starting the search on Westlaw itself. So now we open up to Westlaw. We've got a couple different methods. If you've been watching the other presentations on searching in secondary materials on Lexis or Westlaw, you know we always have 2 or 3 methods to do it. One approach certainly is we could start with secondary sources, and then we could narrow down this long list of secondary sources using a topic. You may find a topic for zoning. If you don't, you'd want to look broader and look at the topic for real property. But another approach I would like to point out is to go to a practice area. So this is essentially a predefined subject search that West has provided for us on these different topics. Zoning law, we can search through the list, the alphabetical list for zoning law. We're not going to find zoning law, but we will find real property law. And when we do that, what we're going to get is not just secondary sources that you see here about in the middle of the screen, but all materials related to real property. So cases, court orders, statutes, regulations, agreements. This is essentially like having a property law library online. Again, we're still looking for zoning, and we even see the American Law of Zoning as a title. That's great. We can click on that. Let's just take one additional second and look at all the real property secondary sources. And you'll see we've got a bunch. In fact, we've got 265, and they cover whole, both national and jurisdictional zoning law materials. And of course, the third way is we can look for the American Law of Zoning. And from the title bar, this is the fastest way if you know what you're looking for, and just jump right into the resource. Okay, so what do we do here? Well, just like with Lexis Advance, Westlaw brought us to the chapter listing or the table of contents screen. We look at tools and resources, and we see we can search the zoning index. Just to get a sense for what the tool is, though, let's look for a few contextual clues about it, so we know how recent it is and what it covers and who published it. The first stop is to look at the information bubble. We see it was last updated May 2017, and we see the author's name, and this is the 5th edition. We can find information now about the author. That is one of the key things about treatise research, is the authority of the author to write it. This is Patricia Salkin, Distinguished Professor of Law, Associate Dean in Government at Albany Law School. There's more information about her. We can also look at the preliminary materials and probably find out a little bit more about it. This is the 5th edition National Treatise. There is a November 2017 update and a little bit more information for that sense. Let's go back to the full table of contents. It gives us a listing table of contents. Let's go to the full table of contents. And when we do that, we're back within the resource itself. And now I think at last we can actually search it. We notice that we are now searching. The search box will search just this title, the American Law of Zoning. And we can type in setback, which is a bit broad, but it'll work for us. And click on search. And it's searching, of course, the full text of the entire treatise. We could have just searched in the index, but opted not to. And we get 199 entries. And just like looking at the list of result list from the catalog, we want to kind of do the same thing. We'll look at a result list within the treatise and kind of identify where these results are coming from. This is chapter 7 on zoning ordinances, generally setback requirements. Looks good. Chapter 9, setback regulations. Looks like the author treats this in 2 different places. We see another entry for chapter 9, another entry for chapter 9, a 4th entry for chapter 9, and a 5th one. So chapter 9 probably is where we need to go for all the details about setbacks and setback requirements when building property. Let's start with the first one. Generally, setback requirements. Presumably, it's the most relevant. And what we find out is, first of all, we're in chapter 7 that we knew. Within objectives articulated enabling legislation, these are the objectives of zoning, general welfare, aesthetics. So this is one aspect of it. In other words, why we have setback requirements. This is some information about it. This is the text, of course, of the treatise. And then importantly, secondary sources, we look for citations, and here are the footnotes for it. We also want to look at the references as well and see what the references are. And we find research references, a reference to the Key Number Digest. We'll look at that in cases. And then references to other treatises and practice aids. This is fantastic. If we need to expand our secondary authority research, here are 4 or 5 additional results. And even a trial strategy, zoning proof of unreasonableness of aesthetic regulations, and AMJUR proof of facts. It's part of the AMJUR family. Let's go back to the search results and look at one other thing in chapter 9. So here we are. This is chapter 9, setback regulations. again, the context for this is very important. We can read about a very lengthy article now about setback regulations and the power to do so. Scroll through the long article, and there are more citations in the footnotes. But we see there are other entries here, and so we want to go back and look at those entries. We can go probably back to the beginning of chapter 9, and we see an introduction, types of zoning regulation. Here are use restrictions, general characteristics of zoning ordinances, height, bulk, and area restrictions. So this is the big overview of setback requirements within the context of zoning regulations. And again, maybe we need to go up or down within the chapters to find exactly what we're looking for. Don't forget about looking at the research references for the chapter itself. Those will bring us to a larger selection of key number digests, probably the same set of treatise and practice aids, and a few more citations for trial strategy. All right, so at this point, you have a way to access treatises starting from the catalog, finding the call number, walking to the section of the library where the call number exists, or linking through to the online version of the treatise, if there is an online version of the treatise and your library subscribes to it, or going directly to one of the research services rather, and finding it that way.